Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the session on Indigenous Voices in Water Governance. I'm Sharon Megdal. I am director of the Water Resources Research Center at the University of Arizona in the United States, and it's my honor to moderate this session today. I want to start by thanking the co-conveners of the session, the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and the Water and Tribes Initiative for the Colorado River Basin. And I want to thank all of you for being here with us. We have a jam-packed agenda, but before we get started on that, I want to recognize where we are and whose lands we're on here in Stockholm, Sweden. In the United States, we've started not that long ago acknowledging the lands of the people of the lands on which universities stand and so forth. And so I'd like to invite Inger Axel Albinson, I'm not sure if I got that middle part right, to come up. Inger, I thought she was here. Oh, she's right there, thank you. So Inger's gonna welcome us, hopefully, to our lands.
So, can you hear me? So this is a sort of translation and adaptation and alteration of something that I learned from my friends in Australia and from New Zealand. This is not a thing we usually do here in Sweden, so I get a little bit emotional about it. Some of the Swedish land is Sami land. We don't own it, but we have the right to use it. We have the custodian of that land since immemorial time. We acknowledge the Sami people as the traditional and continuing custodians of that land. Seas, mountains, forest, water, rivers. So we recognize the continuing connection to land, water, and culture and pay our respects to the elders, past and present, and we express gratitude to them. And we acknowledge the emerging new leaders, young ones. So we embrace the spirit of reconciliation, working towards more self-determination of our land, equity of outcome, and an equal voice for Sweden, Sami people. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the equal voice and elevating the voice is a common theme we've heard a lot of already, and I think we'll hear that through our speakers today. So we'll have something of a three-part session where we're going to have some presentations by Indigenous individuals from the Colorado River Basin, and we're very pleased also to have our Commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation here with us. And I'll give each one as I introduce, as they come up, a little bit more of an introduction. Then we're going to have some comments from other regions and other parts. And this is what we have learned is so critically important and came to the forefront through the UN Water Conference when we were there in March, and we had some cross-fertilization of the regions, and it's very meaningful, and we wanted to include that here in this session. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So I just do want to mention that my water center is almost a 60-year-old center at the University of Arizona. We work a lot on engaging with the communities of all kinds to help educate, to do real-world connected research, and to educate students as well as the community. And in the past several years, we've undertaken what I've called the Indigenous Water Dialogues, where we're trying to help further the engagement and the dialogue and the education. And I just want to mention, and I have a bunch of these little cards with me if anybody wants to pick one up. A couple years ago, our annual conference was on the topic of Indigenous water resilience, and we have a very nice non-academic style publication that really expresses and takes forward the voices of the participants in the conference. I've got the QR code here, and I really am very proud of it. And I'm not boasting for myself because I didn't write the document, but it was a result of our conference. And I really would encourage, if you want to learn more about some of the issues in the Colorado River Basin from a tribal water resilience perspective, to take a look at that. And I am feeling a little, I don't know, deprived or whatever, in that I don't have dress, I don't have garb that I wear from my growing up in New Jersey in the United States and living in Arizona now for over 40 years. But I do want to mention, because a few of us have it on, I want to mention this clip. And this clip is a symbol of the Women in Water Diplomacy Network, which really launched its activities globally here at Stockholm World Water Week last year. And I wanted to mention it because there are many voices that we need to have heard and elevated, including voices of women. And so I just want to note that that's what a few of us have on today, and you might wonder. And you'll be hearing more over time about that. So now I'd like to get into the session, and our first speaker is going to be Daryl Vigil, who's a Hickory Apache enrolled. He's the co-facilitator for the Water and Tribes Initiative, one of the co-conveners. And he's worked for years advocating for the recognition of tribal water rights and self-determination in the Colorado River Basin. And he's going to provide an overview of the Colorado River Basin and bring up issues of justice, equity, and inclusion. So, Daryl?
Does he switch the slide, or am I?
There's a clicker, or you can just
Okay.
arrow
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Daryl Vigil. I'm a member of the Hickory Apache Nation. I'm also part Zia Pueblo and Jemez Pueblo from the state of New Mexico, and very, very honored to be here today. And I want to thank Sharon, I want to thank Siwi, for the invitation and for the opportunity to talk about the Colorado River Basin today. And I also want to thank the Siwi leadership in terms of the amount of Indigenous conversation at World Water Week. I think, I was at the UN water meeting in March, and we did a panel there, and to see the amount that has escalated in terms of the conversation around Indigenous peoples and Indigenous water rights has really escalated. And it's been my personal passion and purpose, to inform the greater public in my area about the Indigenous folks living in their own backyards. And so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them afterwards as well, because this can get pretty complicated really quickly. I was in the Grand Canyon in May. I got to be there for 8 days, and it was pretty incredible. And the reason I put that on there is just because every time that I'm, in nature and on a river, there's connection there. And river gave me voice, river gave me purpose. And I'll always be grateful for that, because I have that. And every time that I'm on the river, it strengthens my resolve to continue what I do. So I wanted to show that. And I'm going to be back in the Grand Canyon in September. So this is the Colorado River Basin. If you could imagine a map of the United States, and this is the southwestern portion of it. It's a huge, huge geographic area, and fifth largest economy in the world. What it comprises of 2 countries, 7 states, 30 tribal sovereigns, 40 million people, and is governed by the law of the river, which was created in 1922, and is currently facing the driest period in history hydrology. Sharon talked a little bit about that in terms of, what my purpose is, but, absolutely hydrology has driven us to the conversation about equity, justice, and inclusion. And I'm very grateful for that because, as an Indigenous person, we've lived sustainably in the Southwest area for arguably 20,000 years or so. And if you're talking about adaptation and sustainability in a particular area, it would seem like you would want to go to those folks to find out how they live that long. And so this particular slide shows too that, and so you can understand the complexity of the Colorado River Basin in terms of the 30 tribal sovereigns, 2 countries, 7 states, federal law, federal water law, state water law, local law, and then now on top of that, tribal settlements and decrees. And each one of those things being different from the next. So it becomes very, very complex in terms of, what's going on there. The tribe hold rights to 3.4 million acre rights of the Colorado River, which is 25% of the volume of the river. And right now, we don't have any structural inclusion into that process of policy making in the Colorado River Basin. And we haven't historically either. And I'm so, so grateful today that we have the Commissioner of Reclamation here today, Camille Tootin, who absolutely is committed in terms of, how do we change that? How do we start to look at structural inclusion? And how do we look at, the process for that? And so hydrology continues to be the same, and it's forcing us to actually build relationships. And so that's something that's really important. And I just wanted to touch on real quickly, too, that, and so you see these little shaded areas there. And those aren't part of the Colorado River Basin, but it's really, really important to understand that those are trans-basin diversions. California gets 4.4 billion acre feet. The city of Albuquerque in New Mexico gets, or the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District gets 90,000 acre feet of water a year. And so the Colorado River has been absolutely, hit really hard in terms of development and overuse and over-allocation. And that's the position that we're in now. And why is that so important in terms of, what's happening with tribes in the basin? And this is the map of the 30 tribes in the basin. There are 30 tribal sovereigns in the basin. And it's really important to understand that 20 of those have either settlements or decrees. And 10 of them still have outstanding claims. And for instance, if you're in the state of Arizona, where most of the tribal indigenous people are, if you don't have a settlement or a decree, it's highly unlikely that they'll build infrastructure for you. And why is that so important? During COVID, if indigenous people in the United States died at 3.5 times the rate of any other demographic. Why is that? We didn't have access to clean water. In 2023, we still didn't have access to clean water, and Michelle will talk more about that in a little bit. And so, that's a real brief overview of the Colorado River, and I want to spend, how much time do I have, Faith? 4. Okay, so I want to take a little bit of time just to talk about the historical involvement of tribes in the basin. And historical involvement has been, like I mentioned, we've lived here for thousands of years, and we've lived sustainably and adaptively. And why is that? Something my grandparents taught me, that absolutely, that we operate from a place of complete humility and understanding that we're just part of a greater whole. And if you're part of a greater whole, what responsibility do you have in terms of protecting the environment? And so when we talk about indigenous folks in our area and the ones that I know, it's kind of inherent in our DNA in terms of, our connection with nature, because we're just part of the greater whole. We're not better or worse. We're just part of it. And because we have minds, we have the responsibility to take care of that, to ensure that that's always going to be available, especially the water, the life-giving water, for future generations. And so when we're talking about water planning for the future, we lived in this basin for thousands of years, policy, that is enacted is very limited and usually reactive in terms of how it's created. And so really trying to set the mindset of, how we can start to think about this long term and think about this together in terms of our planet needs to be saved. and how do we do that together? And that becomes really, really important. And so last thing I wanted to show was, and all this lies in the heart of what you probably all know about colonization, in terms of our ability that we were almost completely wiped out, and the fact that those practices are embedded in the fabric of the United States, and that those are the things that we want inclusion into in terms of speaking on behalf of our own water rights and being able to be self-determined on how we allocate resources. And we're still trying to do that in this day and time because we haven't met the capacity divide of 100 years in water policy. And we're trying to catch up to that so that we can actually have a say in our water rights. The other thing that's really important to understand about Indigenous folks in our country is that, the fact that, this practice of genocide, that has gone on for a long time absolutely has given us the inability to reconcile our past. And our narrative has been completely controlled by somebody that is not us. And so that's something that we're trying to do now. And it's all about relationships, because that narrative showed that, a picture of a glimpse of a romanticized idea about who we were as a people. And if you look at those 30 tribal sovereigns in the basin, each one is absolutely unique and individual and has their own language, their own geography. And so if you know one tribe, you know one tribe. And if that's the case, there is no Indian solution. And one of the big things I want to just leave you with is that at the UN, we started creating this conversation. I think it's expanded here now. And so I think, it's about relationships. I'm really excited because we're talking about a basin exchange with Australia and with Aboriginal people there with the Colorado River Basin so that we can start to work together. And because this really is a global conversation. And so I want to leave you with that, that for me, this is absolutely something that, that I'm going to continue to do for the rest of my life. And I'm very encouraged. I'm so thankful for all those people that I've seen on panels that absolutely have inspired me as well. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
I'm going to now introduce Commissioner Camille Kalimlin-Tootin, who was confirmed, and you can make your way up. I'm going to do the introductions down here so I'm not just popping up and down the stairs so much. Was confirmed by the U.S. Senate on November 4th, 2021 as the 24th Commissioner for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. She is only the second U.S. confirmed female commissioner in Reclamation's 119-year history, and the first Filipino-American confirmed by the Senate to lead a bureau in the Department of Interior. And we're so delighted to have you here. You've been a ready speaker for the Water Center on so many occasions, and all of us, and we're grateful for that. And Commissioner Tootin will provide an overview of the hydrology and policy considerations under discussion and development, and include a reference to tribal consultation. So thank you, and I'll give you this. Indicated.
Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone. It's great to be a part of this global conversation on water. Great, thank you. And I am especially proud to be here representing the United States with the Bureau of Reclamation on behalf of Secretary Holland of the Department of the Interior, the first Native American Cabinet Secretary for the United States, and to be on this panel with sovereign nations, Vice Chair Cloud, with Southern Ute, Jicarilla, and the Navajo Nation. It is an absolute privilege to be here with you today. So first, let me level set and talk to you about who the Bureau of Reclamation is. We were founded in 1902 with a very specific mission: to deliver water and to produce power. We started in agricultural regions to reclaim the lands, and Fast forward to our 121-year history, we serve 40 million people in the Colorado River Basin alone. You saw the map from Denver down to San Diego. We help to irrigate 10 million acres of land across the American West. And we help to support some important ecosystems like the Grand Canyon that was mentioned today. And so our mission has evolved as the West has evolved, and certainly challenges in light of climate change has made our mission even that more interesting. So I'm going to start with my home basin, the Colorado River Basin. This is a picture of our two major reservoirs. Lake Mead, which is right outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, and Glen Canyon Dam, which is in the upper basin. When we walked into the door, we were at 25% of capacity for a 60 million acre foot system. We were looking at possibly hitting minimum power pool at Glen Canyon Dam. And we're the second largest producer of hydropower in the nation. 3.5 million homes that we provide power to the west. And this was at historically low levels. Here is an example of the end of year storage that we saw at these systems, 60 million acre feet system. You can see in the far left, when Lake Powell was filling, was 34% of the capacity. In 2022, we were at a quarter of a capacity for the system. We had seen the longest 23 years of drought within the Colorado River Basin, and we were nearing critical levels. So what did we need to do? So first we started with significant, and here's another great example of this too, to show I'm an engineer, I love numbers, but this is just the way to show it of, this is the unregulated flow, 21, 22, and 23. When you look at water year 21, we had a snow water equivalent of 90%. Yet you see on this map, 37% unregulated inflow. So we used to think, as the Bureau of Reclamation, that our largest reservoir would be snowpack. And what we saw in the last 10 years, specifically in the last 20 years, was that snow wasn't the only factor anymore. When it snowed, it was at higher elevation, so less surface area. It got hotter sooner. And perhaps there was less water in the snow. And then when it did melt, it might have been too soon, and the grounds were dry. And so you can have a 90% year and a 37% runoff. Same fact pattern in 2022. 90% snow water equivalent, 63% runoff. And then what we're also seeing are these drastic swings in hydrology. So water year 2023 was a great year for the Colorado River Basin. 143% of inflow into Powell. So where we are from last year to where Lake Powell is this year is 43 feet of recovery. That's the kind of water year we had. But what we do know is that you can't count on just these wet years. For a system like this, we went from 25% to 39% capacity. And so you can't plan for rainy days. What do you do now? So there's a couple of things that we did. First, we started a process to look at for the short-term management of the system. We have in place guidelines under the law of the river, as Daryl mentioned, for operations until calendar year 2026. Those guidelines in this type of hydrology proved to be inadequate. And so we went through a process that in the United States we call an SEIS, a Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement. What can we do in the short term to help protect these critical elevations so we can continue to deliver water? We started this process in October. and we had a draft supplemental by April of this year. A 6-month process. Because some of our modeling showed that if we didn't have the tools in place, we could be seeing minimum power pool as early as last month if it didn't snow this last winter. So we needed to be ready. From an operational perspective, we also had shortages within the lower basin. California, Nevada, and Arizona are considered the lower basin. And the country of Mexico also took shortages. And so we had to couple that with our operational challenges, but also create these tools at the lower elevation. The result of the supplemental impact statement, as many of you may have seen, was a framework alternative provided by the lower basin states in May. And what that led to was a significant commitment by the lower basin states to conserve 3 million acre feet of water over the next 3 years. That magnitude of conservation has never been done before in the Colorado River Basin. And it started with 2 tribal nations. We had the Gila River Indian community in Arizona and the Fort McDowell tribe, also in Arizona, who said, we will sign up. We will sign up to save water and put it behind Lake Mead. And so when we released our 24-month study in August, which determines our operations for the next calendar year, we were able to model in there 1 million acre feet of system conservation already. And we're not done yet. But that's just between now and 2026. What about post-2026? We've also started that conversation. I'm incredibly proud of this picture. It was just 2 weeks ago that we held the first federal, states, and tribal partnership, a conversation with our 30 sovereign nations, with the states, 7 basin states, and with the Department of the Interior, to all be at the same place, at the same table, to talk about how do we manage the Colorado River for the future. And if there's anything that I'm very optimistic about, is it's the willingness of leaders in this basin, from sovereign nations to the states, and certainly the commitment of the federal government to come to a consensus, because that's what this basin prides itself on, ground up opportunities. And because we have been provided with significant resources by Congress and through President Biden's Investing of America agenda, the Bureau of Reclamation has $12 billion to be able to invest across the Colorado River Basin and in the 17 western states. And we're doing that already. Nearly half of the money that we've used from the bipartisan infrastructure law for water conveyance, for canal linings, for system efficiencies have been within the Colorado River Basin. And we will continue that work, including these long-term investments in sustainable infrastructure as part of our deployment of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is $4 billion, and the different tools that we have with the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I'm optimistic in our path forward, but I'm also realistic that there's hard work. But with partners like this in the basin, we're absolutely going to get it done, not just for this generation, but for future generations after us. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tuden. Our next speaker is Michelle Brown-Yazzie. Michelle is an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation, and I'll let her give the right pronunciation of her clan because I will not pronounce that correctly. And she's also of other descent, and so she's got rich heritage. She's an assistant attorney general for the Navajo Nation Department of Justice Water Rights Unit that is charged with securing and protecting the nation's water rights. Michelle will speak to the Navajo Nation matters, including complexities of jurisdiction, judicial rulings, and water settlements, infrastructure, and water availability. Just those few items, Michelle. You can. Do you want to? Would you like to?
Yeah, I'll
use
use
one?
this one.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say, forgive me, I am a lawyer, and you heard Sharon say that I'm supposed to cover all of those topics in 10 minutes. I don't know how I can do that, but I'll give it a shot. So first, I'm going to introduce myself in our traditional way. Michelle Brown Yazi and Shiat Kachitin Shle, Anathana Bashchin, Sinajani Dashache, Ogalala Lakota Dashanala, Natniljin Datnasha. Thank you very much. We are taught to introduce ourselves so that we are recognized by our relatives as we walk this earth. So we have a lot to cover in 10 minutes, and so I'm going to run some slides. I may not speak directly to them, but I guess what I'd like to convey in my presentation is that the Navajo people, our current circumstances and our relation with water and our lack of access to water right now has all been determined or impacted by federal Indian law, federal laws, policies, regulations, and even court opinions, all up to recently. We had a case that went before the U.S. Supreme Court, and arguments were in March. We got a decision in June, which was very disappointing. The U.S. government does hold our water rights in trust on behalf of the Navajo Nation, and we were told that that although that is the case, the U.S. government as our trustee does not have the responsibility or the duty to assist us in securing access to water. And this is all based off of the fact that our treaties are not clear in its language that the U.S. government has that duty. And so we are kind of left, again, having to work towards securing access to water for our people. We feel like alone. And although we have made progress, great progress, as the commissioner has discussed, collaborating and communicating, it was really disappointing to have the U.S. Supreme Court make that decision in just June of this year. So a really important case for Indian country in the United States is the Winters v. United States case. This is a 1908 case decided by the Supreme Court that recognizes that Indian nations within the United States have rights to water, federally reserved water rights. And these are actually inherent water rights when the U.S. government entered into treaties with the nations. They weren't clear about water. However, the Supreme Court recognized that there are implied rights, that in order to have a permanent homeland on these reservations, it comes with the water needed to do that. And Daryl talked about the 1922 Colorado River Compact. Unfortunately, the decisions that were made back in 1922, and this is after the 1908 Winters case, did not include the tribes affected or the country of Mexico in these discussions and this decision making. And we're still all having to deal with that, the fact that we were excluded. As Commissioner Tootin pointed out, there was a meeting 2 weeks ago with the U.S., with the states, and with the tribes. And that was 101 years after this compact. It's taken that long to get us all at the same table. And there's still questions as to how that's going to move forward, but we have the utmost faith in our commissioner that it's going to move forward in a way that we will all be able to benefit. So the Navajo Nation is a sovereign government, and we do have our own Department of Justice, and I'm the Assistant Attorney General for our Water Rights Unit, and we are charged with securing and protecting our water rights. And the work that we do is we're heavily involved in settlement negotiations, litigation, and implementation once we achieve settlement. So we do have two settlements, one with the state of Utah and the U.S. government, and also in New Mexico in the San Juan River Basin. And these are all connected, are all within the Colorado River Basin. And the first settlement was in New Mexico, and that was in 2010, 2009. And we started developing our water infrastructure. And in 2021, communities on the Navajo Nation that never had running water finally realized that running water in 2021. And now we have in 2020, our Utah water rights settlement was approved by Congress and funded. However, it'll probably take another 5 years before we'll get to that point of actually being able to develop our infrastructure. One thing I didn't mention is that 40%, almost 40% of Navajo Nation homes are without running water. They have never had running water since the establishment of the Navajo Nation. And a lot of people didn't realize that even within the United States until the pandemic really highlighted, the fact that 40% of Navajo Nation homes lack running water. It's just really surprising to a lot of other Americans. And so you'll see where the Navajo Nation is, and we are within 3 states. We actually are within 4, but you'll see the Navajo Nation, that's trust land, and we do own land in Colorado yet, but it's not in trust. And then we are also in the upper basin and the lower basin. And Daryl talked about the complexities of all of this. So I think we're the only tribe that is situated such as this. We're the largest tribe in the U.S., both land base and population. And we don't just deal with 3 states, we deal with 7 states, and those are the Colorado River Basin states, the upper basin, the lower basin. In one of our settlements, in the New Mexico settlement, we actually had to get approval from all 7 states and the U.S. In order to get move the water the way that we needed in order to serve our communities. And in each settlement, each state is demanded that we be restricted to only use the water allocated within that state. We can only use it in our reservation in that state. So Utah water has to stay in Utah, and New Mexico water in New Mexico. We haven't reached a settlement with Arizona. That is something that we're still working towards, and we hope will happen, because as a result of not having running water, our people are continuing to have to haul water. Sometimes they have to drive, 2 hours, and then several times a week. And this is very expensive, not only just for gas, but you have to purchase the water too, like in the outside, the border towns and other places where water has to be purchased. And I guess the reason I put this slide up here, this is a result of the Upper Colorado River Basin Compact. But also, we talk about our Aboriginal homelands. This is where our people are from. We have our own creation story, and we came out of the ground within the 4 sacred mountains from the north, south, east, and west. And so this is our Aboriginal land. All these lines that we're dealing with today are all made up. Our ancestors never had to deal with these lines, and they also knew how to live in this area without, feeling so much discomfort as we do now. And so, we still have, even though a lot of progress has been made, we still have a lot of work to do. And so I'm just going to quickly go through these slides. And, as Daryl said, the all the rules, the politics, the they're so complex. And bottom line is, we don't want to have to keep going from generation to generation from here forward, having to teach our children that this is how you get your water to sustain your life and your future. This is not a permanent homeland, and so our hope is that we'll move forward in a way where we will be able to flourish. Our communities will flourish just like any other communities in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I just want to put a plug in. That last photo there was taken by Nikki. Nikki took it. Nikki Tooley. Because she's my graduate student, and so that's her family members there. But what I want to put a plug in for is that we at the Water Resources Research Center, one of the ways we engage is through a photo contest. And we focus on often Arizona photos, but we've recently created a category of photos of water from anywhere in the world. And so if you want to find out about our photo contest, and then we use your photos. That's one of the things. We use it in presentations, on our materials, and so forth. So I just want to note that I have cards, how to subscribe to our stuff, and we'd love to have some of you engage with us in that way. So our last of the four presenters speaking to Colorado River Basin is Lorelei Cloud. Lorelei is vice chair of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe and a member, of course, of the Southern Ute Indian Tribe. She's committed to conservation, leadership development, and preserving the Ute language, traditions, and culture. She can bring in so many different aspects of what she does. She's going to speak to her nation's water availability matters and to efforts and opportunities for greater inclusion, including Indigenous women. So do you want to use the hand or the one up there? Okay.
Did I touch the wrong? Okay. Mic 1. Nuniaga Lorelei Cloud. Nuniaga Kavsiid. Nu Pina Nuch. Nu Muach Kapotavat. Nu Pinuvat. So hello everyone, I am from Lorelei Cloud. I am from the Muach and Kapota bands of Utes. I just want to thank you all. I want to thank our sponsors for allowing for me to be here and your willingness to help elevate Indigenous voices, especially on water issues at this critical time. I'd also like to acknowledge our Sami people. Thank you for allowing my feet to touch your homelands. I'm very grateful. Thank you. So very quickly, I want to introduce you to my tribe, and because I think it's really important for you to understand that we are still here. This is where I come from. It's really important to understand that our history as Ute people is very vibrant. That we're here, we're going to continuously to be here, and because my people are originally from the Colorado Rockies. My creation story starts in the Colorado Rockies. I don't have a migration story compared to other tribes. And so being able to be at the homelands or the beginning of the Colorado River is really important to me. And so the Ute people are the oldest and continued residents of what is now known as the state of Colorado. There is a misconception that Indigenous people are part of the past, but I stand here before you as a proud Ute woman to tell you that we are still here, and my community and my culture is vibrant, and we will always continue to be here as long as we possibly can for generations to come. And so I brought this photo because this shows, our current state of my tribe, and the top photo is my tribal council. Last year, until we had Councilwoman Penny Coos, the second gentleman on the left, it was all women except for the chairman. So one day we're going to have all women in that leadership role. So here is a picture of my homelands. And before Europeans came and discovered America, this was where my people roamed and we lived. And if you were to overlay this map over the Colorado River Basin, you would see that we are the upper basin. We've always been the caretakers of our environment and our water. And so again, we're very proud to be the people that took care of this area. The Ute people encompassed about 2/3 of the modern day Colorado, which we also include, encompassed Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. In 1868, my homelands was significantly reduced because of different events that were happening during that time, and some of my Ute bands were forcibly removed during this time. So there was at one time 14 bands of Utes, and currently there's only about 7 left. And so I come from the Mach and Kapota bands. The Weemanooch is the Ute Mountain Ute tribe now, and the Uncompahgre, White River, and the Uinta bands make up the Ute Indian tribe in Utah. Through the attrition of natural resources such as gold and silver led also to a smaller part of our reservation be taken, and that happened in 1873, excuse me. So currently, this is where I'm located within the state of Colorado. My reservation currently spans 110 miles long and 15 miles wide, so very, very different from what it used to be. But it's also deceiving with what my reservation looks like compared to like my sister tribe, the Ute Mountain Ute tribe that's next to us. Their land is it's a continuous piece of land that's all tribal land. My reservation was opened up to the allotment era, so my reservation actually consists of, it's called the checkerboard land status. So I have 2 counties, and within that, in my little area, again, I have 2 counties. I have state land, I have county land, I have private land, I have U.S. forestry, I have tribal trust, tribal assignment, and tribal allotment, all within this little piece of land. So it becomes very complicated when you talk about water policy and getting water to where it needs to be. And not only that, also for law enforcement jurisdictions, because we also have to deal with state, the 2 counties, and the federal government when it comes to law enforcement. So everything becomes very complicated. So in my little piece of land, I have 499 square miles that is tribal land and 472 square miles that is private land or fee land. It's also very deceiving when you look at this, because we also have about a little over 5,000 groundwater wells within this little parcel of land, and only 160 belong to the tribe and to tribal members. The rest belong to non-tribal water users. And within this little area, I also have about 160 tribal homes that have to haul water to their homes because they don't have infrastructure in place for them to get water to their areas, because we're very rural, and the geographic area is, we have a lot of mountainous areas, so it's really hard to be able to put in a pipeline. In order for us to get a pipeline or a water line to an area, we have to go through a lot of kind of red tape, basically. So we have to get approval, not just through the tribe, but through the county and through the private landowners. So that process could take, like a normal person, if they wanted to do that, it could probably take them between 3 months and 6 months to get their approvals and get their water line put in. It could take me up to 2 years or longer than that to get a pipeline put in. So it's a very long and tedious process to be able to deliver water. So again, this is a little bit closer up look of my reservation and the different land status. I also have, my reservation is also very unique because I have 7 rivers that flow through my reservation. And compared to other reservations maybe they don't have a water source, but I have 7. But it's also very deceiving because some of my rivers don't have water in them, or I don't have access to get the water from those rivers. My tribe, we put into place our infrastructure, or a drought response plan. And so what this plan shows is that there was about, when the stronger the the drought, it's like a tier system. So if there's a response that happens, the stronger events that needs to happen. And so sometimes we have to not deliver water to our water users for tribal members, where other non-members will continue to get water, but my tribal members will not. So we are continuously working towards a better future to be able to provide water to everybody in my area. We have a lot of different challenges within my reservation as well too. We're trying very hard to be included in conversations and the development within our own area, but also within the Colorado River Basin. We have areas where we want to be able to elevate our voice, and so we try very hard to be partners with everybody that we possibly can so that we can continue to elevate our voice, not just for ourselves, but for other Indigenous people as well too. And so this is a photo of one of my rivers, and so you can tell that there's not a lot of water left in our river system. So I want to talk about the Indigenous Women's Leadership Network. So myself and a couple of other women within the Colorado River Basin, along with the Water and Tribes Initiative, we co-created the Indigenous Women's Leadership Network. And we created this platform to be able to help women across the Colorado River Basin that work within water and natural resources. We want to create mentorships to inspire each other. We want to be able to exchange information with each other. We want to build our leadership skills and help refine them. We also want to help facilitate other Native women to get into leadership roles and whatever they want to be, the hydrologists or attorneys, whatever they want to do, we want to be there to support them because we know that women take on a lot of different roles within their lives. You know, we're not just a tribal leader. I'm also a mother. I'm also a daughter. I take care of when I had my grandma, I took care of her as well too. You know, so we have all these different roles, and sometimes we forget to be able to support each other. And so this network is there to help bring other women along with us, because I can't do this alone, and I need to be able to, I'm not going to also be in this position by or forever, so I need somebody else to be able to take my role and to keep moving forward. And so this Indigenous Women's Leadership Network is very, very important, and so please use the QR code to gain more information. And with that, Duwayak, and please again, use the QR code and to access my tribe's website to gain more information. Duwayak.
Thank you so much, Lorelei. So we will now move into the second part of our session, which is to get some reaction, commentaries, insights from some other parts of the world. And so I'd first like to call up Phil Duncan, Leslie Phil Duncan, but I think in the directory, the Leslie is there. And he's from the Murray, New South Wales, and is a member of Gameroi Nation. He's an elected representative of the nation's native title claimant group, and he has many years of experience working with Aboriginal people in government to improve their lives. So Phil's going to talk a little bit, I think, about connecting the regions, and as Phil does, whatever else he wants to speak to. So...
my Colorado Basin brothers and sisters and many other Indigenous people. For those that don't know, I was the first appointed Indigenous chairperson of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority's Basin Community Committee. It's not an Indigenous committee. Farmers, irrigators, green groups, local government, and I had a responsibility of reporting to our Ministerial Council and our Basin Officials Committee. It was a position that gave me the opportunity to start conversations. Now, where I'm from, my nation, you can fit 3.5 Great Britains in it. We have 11 rivers, even the headwaters of the Hunter River starting my nation. We have the Great Artesian Basin, and we have an international Ramsar site. And Gali, as we call it, Gamilaroi for water, is significant to us. We are system thinkers. We think in cultural systems. But where I want to go with this is that, you know, in the Murray-Darling Basin, 1 million square kilometres, There are 47 different nations. There are 120 local Aboriginal land councils. And it's not easy. We have operated in a vacuum of opportunity. These mirrors that we live in, we talk into, the conversations that we have. My whānau from across at Aotearoa, the generosity of spirit of how we invite and talk to one another. Now we have this amazing opportunity to have a basin-to-basin exchange. And I want to applaud our conversation started at the UN World Water Conference, and thank you, Marabu, for allowing me to share the stage with you and saying if she's in the room. From a single conversation, we are now exploring every opportunity to have this basin-to-basin exchange, to share our knowledges, to look at practices where our native fish, our wetlands, the reconnection, and using our Indigenous knowledge, our cultural science, our cultural way of life, our cultural methodologies in interacting with country in that symbiotic manner, which will hold us firm to look at, then gravitating out. Because I have a vision, and I hope I realise it in my time, of a global basin-to-basin exchange, where we can take our young ones with us and have them connected through a chain of conversations, a chain of relationships, a series of dialogues that they, a platform that they can grow into, a framework that they can grow into where they too can share it. Finding the balance is important. We are at a critical time in New South Wales, in Australia with our Murray-Darling Basin. We've just had our minister launch a review, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it because this is about us. This is about this wonderful opportunity in time to share the load, share the knowledge. We're living in a world of shrinking resources, as in everybody talks about money. But I want you to think about what price do we put on our knowledge? What value? And then our willingness and the opportunity to share that, to make a difference together. What works here may work there. Just very quickly, in 1101 in Australia, there was a 30-year drought. A 30-year drought. And our people of Australia survived it because they knew country. They knew how to look after country because country looks after us. I want to also pay homage to our Department Secretary of the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, Lynn O'Connell. And Llewellyn, are you in the room? I can't see past that. Anyway, they have embraced my message of return, and we are now leaving no stone unturned to make this happen. And I also want to say a huge marabu for the invite, and I will be coming in December to sit with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And December he's referring to, we have a big meeting every year of the Colorado River water users. And if you go to the whole, that geography and the size of the economy and all that's going on, it's open to anybody who pays the registration fee. So if anybody wants to get over, it's a half-hour drive out to Hoover Dam. If you haven't been to Hoover Dam, which is one of the person-made wonders of the world, is designated. So, we'd welcome any and all of you there. Our next speaker is Erina Watani. I think I said that right. I've been trying to practice that. Who's from, this I probably will not say right, but Waikato, Aotearoa, or whatever. And she's the Chief Scientist Maori for the New Zealand Biological Heritage Science Challenges, and is also one of 5 Crown-appointed board representatives for the Waikato River Authority. And again, she's going to connect the region. And I just want to give the speakers, as we've been hearing, there's so many common themes, and we'll have one more commentator after Erina. But I'm going to ask you a question while the audience thinks about its questions, and those on Zoom, you can put some questions in chat. And I'm going to ask you about all these firsts. We keep hearing about firsts and all this. And, whether that leaves you optimistic about the future or not. I mean, we know we have challenges. So just think about your thoughts about firsts and optimism as we get to the Q&A. So Erna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Kia ora tātou. Wow. Firstly, just greetings from my waters to your waters. So my river is the Waikato River in the North Island of New Zealand. So in terms of our worldview, we see our river as a tupuna or an ancestor, which has mana, which is spiritual authority and power, which in turn represents the mana and the mauri of our people, of our tribe. It's actually daunting to come up here and provide comments because there are so many differences and similarities between our catchments. I made notes of some. So similarities like understanding as Indigenous peoples that we are part of nature, that we have obligations and responsibilities to look after and care for our rivers, and also seeking sovereignty and self-determination in terms of managing our rivers. Then massive differences between our catchments, especially in terms of the complexities with your catchment, the multiple states, the 30 tribes. We only have 5 tribes on our river. And pretty much just the sheer scale of your basin. It's humongous. But my ears did pick up when I heard you talk about the first federal tribal state partnership meeting that happened recently, because it reminded me of the co-governance structure that we have over the Waikato River. So as a result of a treaty settlement in 2010, we established the Waikato River Authority, which is made up of the 5 river tribes. They have a member each, and then 5 government officials, government-appointed representatives sit on this governance body. And we also have a policy, a leading policy-setting document called Te Ture Whaimana, which is one vision and strategy that sits over the whole river. Now, this policy statement, this document has the same weighting as a national policy statement, and so this document, or this vision and strategy, informs all of the regional policy statement and all of the territorial authority documents must give effect to this vision and strategy that we developed out of our settlement. That's just one model. I'm not saying that that's what you need to bloody develop or have in your case. I was just sort of sharing some of the things that we have in our region. Yeah, that's pretty much it. 5 minutes. So thank you.
And our last commentator is, we're going to kind of bookend our program with our host, the Sami. And Anna Edmondson, who's a member of the board of the Sami Youth Organization, and spoke so eloquently yesterday at the session many of us were at, has graciously agreed to a last-minute invitation to join us and share some perspective of the young, and we know we have to look forward, and I hope we're doing some things right, Anna, but I'll leave it to you to speak, and then we'll have all of our speakers come up for some Q&A, so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank all of you for your stories and for the really nice conversations we've had during these days. I'm going to comment to each one of you a little bit. And I will start with Daryl. In Sapmi, we are in the same situation as you. We also have the hydroelectric power plants that take over our waters and change them. So I want to take up a point that many people have been talking about today and yesterday, that the developers say that no one lives in our areas. It's not many people that get affected, but we do. And I'm going to say a point from yesterday's speech too, that of course it's not going to be visible that we've lived here because our generations previously had made sure to not be able to put any burden on the future generations. And that has always been and is always going to be our goal. Camille, we also see the effects of climate change, the unreliable and changing weather. We have unpredictable ices which affect the reindeer herding and the fishing, and we don't only risk our nature, we risk our reindeers and we risk our lives crossing them, and with the new nature coming up. Michelle, we have in Sápmi a new ruling from the High Court where the Girias Sami village has sued the government. They now have the assignment right for fishing and hunting in their area, and they decide who can fish and hunt in their areas. And this has been a really important case for our futures and for the other Sami villages in Sápmi. Lorelei, you're talking about saving a culture. The lands and waters has always been taken away from us. But I'm here to represent the youth, and I know that we're strong and we're hopeful, and we've got a really good community together over country borders, and we're not going to let our nature and water be exploited anymore. Thank you.
All right, so Anna, you can stay up here because we're going to call now all of the speakers up. And while they're coming up, we do have somebody with one of our aides here will help with the mic, and I'm going to stand up here, although I might be standing in front of someone because the audience can't see me when I'm down there. But let's start with that first question about kind of, like I said, lots of firsts in terms of appointments and first-time representatives of Indigenous communities on a board, a commission, expanded types of consultation, and just generally more recognition. I know there's more work to be done, but does it leave you encouraged? Do some of you who are in these positions feel discouraged? Just talk a little bit, if you would. And I'll just ask who wants to speak, and I'll hand you the mic, and just stand while you speak. So, Lorelei, we'll start with you.
Thank you. As soon as she asked this question, I wanted to answer it. So for me, because I know in my introduction it was very short, and I know that some of you were in another session. So I became the first Indigenous person to sit as a board trustee for the Nature Conservancy for the state of Colorado. I also became the first Native American to sit on a state water board for the Water Conservation Board. And we've had a lot of first meetings within the Colorado River Basin, particularly within the Upper Basin. We had our first meeting with the Upper Colorado River Commission since the creation of the compact. We had our very first meeting in 2021 with the Interior Secretary, with the tribal nations, talking with the Interior Secretary about water. All of these first came in the last 2 years. And quite honestly, it shouldn't have happened. These all should be normalized conversations. And I know Daryl has, I tell him all the time, nothing in 2023 should be historic moments. And I truly feel that way. Even in my positions now that I have been the first on the Nature Conservancy and the Water Conservation Board, I feel like other people should have been the first. They should have always been there. I should be just following their lead and following the trail that they've already blazed. It shouldn't be me. I still feel like I'm a young person, but I'm also grateful that I'm able to do that, and I'm really hoping that I can bring other women along with me and making them. I want them to be better than me. I want them to do greater things than me. Thank you.
So I think it's an absolute privilege to be a part of all of these firsts across the board. It is my responsibility to make sure it's not the last. And so I think what you're hearing here is a commitment to be able to say, we've been a part of this, but one day it'll just be commonplace because that's how we do business. And if that is what we can leave, is ensuring that there's a continuation of this work, then I think we've done good. by the future?
Yeah, I want to talk just a little bit about, we're in the middle of the creation of new policy for the Colorado River. In 2026, we're supposed to, in less than 2 years, come up with the plan for the Colorado River. And in terms of the future policy and operations of the Colorado River. And one of the biggest things that's involved in that is just, as I mentioned before, is gaining structural inclusion. Because if we don't have structural inclusion, none of this is possible for us. And so I absolutely am hopeful that we have this this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, is the way I see it, to really check ourselves as human beings in the Colorado River Basin, to build consensus of values that should drive policy. And so we have that huge opportunity. So for the last 10 years, as Lorelei kind of alluded to, it's been about building the relationships. Because when we talk to folks, and I talk to a whole lot of you consistently, we're all grounded in the same values. And that's one of the things that I found out about the Colorado River. Most people that I talk to want a healthy, sustainable living Colorado River, but the policy is oppositional to that. And so we need to change that. And we're also talking, and when I say talking about checking ourselves as human beings, what we eat, where we grow things, how we interrelate, and all those kind of things. And we've heard a lot about respect the last few days in terms of that's where it starts. And that's one of the things that I'm committed to, is because that's where it really starts, is the relationships. Because we heard yesterday at the main meeting that we operate in silos, and we're really trying to break down those silos, because once we get to know each other on an individual basis, I heard somewhere, somebody told me, how does transformation happen? It happens one conversation at a time. And hopefully by having these global conversations, that change and that transformation will happen a lot quicker.
You're the first on the Murray-Darling, the chair of the committee?
Yeah, and that came about by some wonderful champions, non-Indigenous champions in the corridors of power and decision making. And, the opportunity for the relationships that position provided me to connect other people and to give them connections to the traditional knowledge holders, those old men and old women, and having them seize the opportunity to have what we call on-country cultural immersions. We're very fortunate that we've got a Basin Officials Committee and a MINCO, a Ministerial Council, that are brave, are willing to step outside their comfort zones to walk on country with us. That's quite unique from where we were 20 years ago when the Basin Plan first started out. But I want to circle back to the opportunity for a first, a basin-to-basin exchange. But it shouldn't just be the first opportunity between the Colorado and the Murray-Darling. It should be the opportunity to extend that to basin to basin to basin, from country to country to country, from person to person, from nation to nation. And I think that opportunity to harvest the traditional knowledge and the practices through that cultural way of life and the cultural methodologies in which we care for country and interact with country, I think that is a recipe for success. I think it's a recipe that can give you knowledge to develop strategies, policies for legislative reform. But we as Indigenous people can't do this alone. When we will not. We are not doing it in isolation of our greatest champions, who are non-Indigenous people. And I just say this is another first not a first, but to continue walking with us as we want to walk with you. And I know that this is just the second part of our conversation. And Commissioner, I'd love for you to meet our leaders that share the same passion and love to make a difference with and for Indigenous people.
Thank you. Thank you. So, questions in the audience. It's a little dark to see. I see one back here in the middle. And then, and in the front. So we'll go to the back there in the middle and the front, and then we'll take a couple questions and then get the answers.
Hi, Christine Gross. I'm from the United States. Wanted to thank the commissioner for being here and all of the indigenous tribes. This has been a remarkable session. I applaud CIWI for putting this together. I heard a very upsetting stat that 40% of residents in Navajo Nation do not have access to running water. What in the world? That can't continue. And I'm just hopeful that Deb Haaland, being the Interior Secretary and a Native American woman, will address this, because that is just a shocking statistic. Water is a basic human right. And I hope maybe you can address this. Is she addressing this? Thank you.
Yeah, so before we go to that question, I think that's such a big question. So I'm going to, maybe Commissioner, would you like to say something first? And then I think the Water and Tribes Initiative people should say something. Or Michelle, every one of you could answer this question. Who wants to stand up first? Okay, this is a volunteer thing, so.
So one of my proudest professional achievements was the Claims Resolution Act, which settled the tribal water rights for 7 indigenous nations across the United States. And prior to that, the enactment of the Navajo Gallup settlement. And what we were able to do and celebrate this year as part of our investments with the bipartisan infrastructure law was acquire the San Juan Generating Station power plant reservoir to be the second part of the lateral. It was mentioned already that we had the Cutter lateral already in New Mexico that's already active. Kids are getting water from their pipes in their house and not trucking that. But there's certainly a lot more work to do, and we're committed to the nation, and not just the Navajo Nation, but all of the sovereign tribes within the United States.
Yeah, it's unconscionable, and it's not right. You know, that in 2023, that you saw how many Navajos are still hauling water. My local municipal system, you know, was built by the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the 60s. And it wasn't until 2000 when that system was handed over. High incidence of cancer and those kind of things. 3.5 times more Native American tribes, as I mentioned earlier, are 3.5 times more likely to die from COVID. Alaska Natives and indigenous people in America are 19 times more likely not to have indoor plumbing in 2023. And yes, it's unconscionable, and yes, it needs to change, and I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's like, well, how do you make that change? How do you make that difference? And making that difference is really is part of this, what we're doing here today, to let folks know. And the real tragedy of this, and we're really working hard on this, is the capacity divide. You know, you had a calculated effort to get rid of people and their land, but we're still here and we have rights. And now we're trying to figure out, you know, well, what is the best way to do this? And one of the something that I was ingrained in is absolutely this concepts of kindness, love, and generosity. And that it has to be grounded in those principles. And how do we create those? We have to create those through the relationship process. And we have to create those with mutual understanding and a willingness to look at, again, the past, to have that reconciled so that we can move forward. Because there's a lot of, you know, hiding the head in the sand in terms of what's going on. And so when you talk about the Navajo Nation, and it's systemic across Indian reservations. We're on the highest of the worst list of social issues. And that's the reality of what's happening in Indian country today. And if you don't have, like for tribes in the basin, if you have a tribal water right, but you don't have the self-determination to execute that, I go back to COVID again, people die because the leadership of those indigenous nations can't make the best decisions on behalf of their people because they can't, because the structures don't allow them to do it.
Thank you. We had a question up here. gentleman right here. And then I'm going to see Faith. Do we have any Zoom questions? I'll have you read we may have one. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring in one Zoom if we had, but go ahead, please.
Thank you all so much for sharing your knowledge. I have a question about partnerships and collaboration, and as you put it, Daryl, structural inclusion. So I work with Indigenous nations in Canada, different contexts, but lots of similarities. And a big part of what we do is trying to do exactly that, co-governance tables, shared decision-making between Indigenous and non-Indigenous governments, with kind of moderate success. But one of the issues we bump up against a lot is the laws of the land are still colonial. And so the underlying jurisdiction and the authority and decision-making lies with the federal government and the provincial governments. So we can have shared decision-making, but it's still short of self-determination. And there's kind of ways around it, right? Like you can still have legislative authority with one government, but maybe you still have shared decision-making in an informal way. But my question is, if you bumped up against that, and Commissioner, you spoke about the state, tribal, federal tables, and if you have, how have you navigated that space? Thanks.
So, yeah, Michelle looks like she's ready to answer that, so you've got the mic first.
Well, part of your question just kind of perked me up because we're stronger together. However, tribes need to be recognized as, each being unique. We all have our unique cultures, language, and so forth. And, with colonization, one thing that I've learned this week in listening to our sisters and brothers from around the globe is that, even to this day, it's like we're waiting for permission to address our problems. And that just doesn't make any sense, because if we continue to wait, we're going to keep waiting, and we can't do that. We have to be creative. We have to be intentional to address these issues. And also, we need to be recognized as having similarities, but also differences as well. I think it's great that we can all come together, be at one table. However, we also need to balance that with the understanding, like I said, with the Navajo Nation, we're the largest land-based tribe and we have the highest population. We're also in a very rural area. I've seen the statistics and the data from the Navajo Nation used to increase the amount of money that's funded towards tribes, but because of the complexities, it doesn't always go to the Navajo Nation. And then we find ourselves divided, as tribes, fighting over, pots of money. So I think we need to find a way to continue to work together in a way that it'll address all of our needs, because water it should be a human right. And I know I didn't get to answer the last question, but I always feel like we're also, competing not just with each other, but we're also competing with corporate America, who is the larger, we're competing with money. Water is money, and that's something that's really has been devastating, because we see the Colorado River just flowing right past us, and it's flowing past us, filling up the swimming pools, watering the lawns down in the metropolitan area, and yet our people are still hauling water. So I know I went all over the place to answer your question, but I hope I got it in there. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have that many minutes left. These are such rich questions with such complexities behind them. And so we know our speakers will be available after the session if you want to catch them. I'm always thinking about, I'm ready to set up a webinar with Siwi to follow up on some of this. So, we'll figure out a way. And that's the whole point. These are continuing conversations. But we do have a couple questions, and Faith needs the microphone here in the front. Faith is going to read a Zoom question for us.
Yes, thank you so very much to our virtual audience for tapping in. We have compliments from Sarah Casayas. Thank you for a great session. We have heard a few times in this session about Indigenous peoples' holistic worldviews and systems thinking. While the session was focused on water governance, I'm wondering if you have seen cascading effects on governance of other resources such as forests or fisheries. Unfortunately, resources are often managed in a separate way with little consideration of the many linkages. And there is a second question that I'm just going to mention right now, and if anybody wants to answer, I personally would be grateful, because this is a question of a how. It's a simple question with a very complex answer, I'm sure. How is it possible to open a dialogue of Indigenous water rights with the water sector?
Okay, so we got two questions on the table. I'll allow anybody who wishes to answer one or both. Okay, let's get the third question. There's somebody in the back, and we'll get those will be the last questions on the floor. Who is it that has the question? I can't. Oh, well, no, over there. Okay, they've what? Okay. I mean, it's great when you're running out of time and people still want to talk. It means it's so engaging, but we're also running out of time. So.
Hi, Sharon. Thank you. My question is related to the New Zealand. I'm just wondering, when I heard a lot about the river, and we in the situation is another topic, Sharon, you are working on a lot, the transboundary. So these are, basically you can see they are nations within nations, and nowadays we also have river basins, for example, the Mekong, the Ganges, Brahmaputra, where indigenous people there, even though not colonized, are being, their water rights are being threatened by neighboring big countries. And we also have transboundary groundwater problems in North Africa. So I'm just wondering, so the how question is also related, right? It's basically a form of human exploitation extended to land and water. And I guess my question is, how do you perhaps use science, since I'm a scientist, to help gain some of those rights back? Thank you.
Okay. So Daryl wants to ask the first. Erin, I think you need to answer the last as a scientist in New Zealand, and somebody can answer that middle one.
I just wanted to answer that first question really quickly that was on Zoom. It's systemic. And that's one of my hopes, is that utilizing water as a mechanism to address all those areas of tribal governance that we're 100 years behind in capacity at least. And so this conversation for me is very important, because if we can accomplish, some of these things in terms of recognition of sovereignty and self-determination through water, hopefully that'll open the other doors in other areas as well. My tribe has a housing shortage of 300 houses and multi-generational families living in one house. So it's systemic.
Yeah, in fact, that was clearly an issue with the Navajo Nation, right? You have multi-generational housing. You had to travel long distances. You have to stop where there are people when you've got the pandemic going on and so forth. So really good question. I've already forgotten what the second question was. I'm just going to leave you. This is your chance for next words, and Erin,
I just wanted to, with the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, the plan is a water resource plan for the whole of the basin, but there are many other actions or initiatives under it. We have a native fish recovery strategy and we also have demonstration reaches, which is repairing reaches of the river, that allow us to unlock the 22,000 barriers, both legal and illegal, for fish migration, for water quality, for connectivity of our arteries and our veins. You call them rivers and anabranches. So, but it's not easy, but we have a plan, and it is a plan that does work, can work, and will guide us through this review on lessons learned from the past. We're right in a review. So we are taking the lessons learned from the first stage that will hold us in good stead to move forward in a better collaborative manner.
Kia ora. So in terms of the question around how would science be used to help in our context, what happened before we established our co-governance board was that we developed a RIS, or Waikato River Independent Scoping Study. And so NIWA, our National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, used the best science to kind of come up with what it would cost to kind of restore our river. It came up at something over 2 billion, because we're a small country, 2 billion. And in terms of the settlement, we got 230 million. So there was definitely a gap between what the best estimate was to fix our river and what the settlement turned out. Also in addition to using science, we use Mātauranga Māori or Māori knowledge as well, so that's given an equal weighting. So we bring together science and Indigenous knowledge in terms of restoring our river. Another way we use science and Mātauranga Māori is in the report card, or how we monitor the improvements in our river over time, because we're 10 years into our co-governance arrangement now, and we've been investing $6 million a year into restoration activities. I know these are tiny figures for you, like big countries, but it's big for us in Aotearoa. So I think, does that answer your question?
Commissioner, and then Anna.
She's going to close out.
Okay.
Just a question with the how. I think it starts from a fundamental level of a willingness to understand each other. I think Daryl brought up, if you know one tribal nation, you just know one tribal nation. And one of the best parts of my job is being able to go across the basin and see what the Colorado River means to those communities, whether it's a tribal nation, whether it's an agricultural community, whether it's taking my girls home to Las Vegas at grandma's house. I know what that means. And so when you recognize that our differences also unite us, that our goals are to have a sustainable river, a sustainable ecosystem for the future, then you have more of a willingness to answer the hows and get to a why.
So before she closes out, because I am going to give the younger generation the last word here, I do want to go back to, I think Malika's still here. I ran up to her at the break after the opening session, and I said, what were those 4 R's that you said? Because I love alliteration, and they were important R's. And this is what we've heard here, and really what has to carry us forward. It's respect, relationships, reciprocity, responsibility, right? And that's what we have to carry forward. I'm going to give Anna the mic for the end, and then please join me in thanking all of our speakers.
Thank you. So I'm also going to answer the question about how do we open the communication with the water sector. I think that it's important that the people that want to build on our lands and want to consultate with us come with the kind of way of talking to us, instead of saying, we're going to build here, what do you want us to do, like, on the side? What can we do for you? And instead come with the, can we build here? What are the possibilities? How can we help you together? And I also want to lift the point that the colonization, in my opinion, is still ongoing. And I think it's really important for the people that do that to acknowledge that and take the responsibility for that.